everybody, my name is Sunny Gupta, and if I look incredibly uncomfortable right now, it's because I am. This coat is like 3 or 4 years old. It is ridiculously uncomfortable, and I'm wearing it to look like a poor man's John Green, because today we're going to France. In this video, I'll be reviewing the French Revolution with you all, so let's hope that I can finish it before this thing cuts off all my blood circulation. Now, the French Revolution. We all know France is bad at wars, but what if I told you France lost a war with itself? Okay, well, admittedly that is some extreme oversimplification of the revolution, but it's also not entirely wrong. The French Revolution primarily began with the overthrowing of the authoritarian king Louis XVI and ended with Napoleon Bonaparte, an authoritarian dictator. Now, a lot happened at the time, and it had major impacts on Europe going forward, but that's just not as funny as saying that France lost a war against itself. Jokes aside, the French Revolution is generally agreed to have begun in 1789 and ended in 1799, but its origins actually go back to the Enlightenment. See, during this time, people had begun to establish the concept of the social contract. This was especially important to thinkers like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. To them, people would get certain civil rights in exchange for losing some of their personal freedoms and agreeing to acknowledge the society and its laws, which should be designed to help and protect all. To Locke, if they didn't protect the natural rights of the people, life, liberty, and property, and to Rousseau, if they didn't work to the benefit of the people, then those people would have the right to change their leaders in government, either peacefully or through force. During the 1780s, this was pretty much France. Their laws and governmental systems were essentially designed specifically for the nobility and the king, in a political and social system called however you say this. I took Spanish, so. In this system, the nobles and the clergy never paid taxes. The nobles and the clergy. So basically the middle and lower classes paid all of the taxes, which put them under immense economic strain. Yeah, that's kind of dumb, but it did pay off for them because King Louis had some pretty banging drip. That's not what I meant that is not what I meant. On top of that, France had very recently participated in some big wars like the American Revolution, sorry about that one, and before that the 7 Years' War, which also had the effect of reducing their colonial holds and weakening their economy. To add on to all that, terrible hail had ruined harvests for a large majority of the population, making food scarce and prices significantly higher. So life all around was terrible. And with all this said, I'd like to make it very clear that the primary motivation for the French Revolution wasn't a bunch of enlightened folks. The fuel was primarily terrible living conditions and the fact that the political system directly cracked down on the poorest people whenever the government needed money. So the people decided that it just wouldn't work anymore. And the Third Estate of the Estates General, which represented all of the population that wasn't the clergy or nobility, decided to split off and become something new, the National Assembly. But they got locked out of the Estates General, so they couldn't do anything. What are you gonna do? Find another building to do legal proceedings in? So yeah, on June 20th, 1789, the Third Estate basically just went into a tennis court and vowed that they would not stop or separate until they had created a constitution. This is really where tensions start to get a bit more violent and serious, with events like the storming of the Bastille taking place in July and tensions escalating further. But thankfully, not too much later, the National Assembly finally got out of the tennis court, which is great because I got a game in there at 3 p.m. On August 4th, they abolished feudalism, and on the 26th, they officially published the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. It established equal taxes for the people, established due process, the sovereignty of the people, natural rights of life, liberty, and property, freedom of expression and religion, and most importantly, that everybody would be subject to the same laws, and that the title of citizen and its rights went to every single person in France unconditionally. This being said, things were still a monarchy, but it was a constitutional one now, which is a big step. One of the most significant moments was the Women's March on Versailles that occurred in October of that same year, which was a riot over bread pricing that forced Louis out of Versailles and into Paris, as well as into signing a decree that ensured good bread prices in the city. This is the moment in which the transfer of power became especially clear. Louis and the Estates General were now being pushed around by the lower peasant classes, and the National Assembly began to really gain power. From there, however, things began to go downhill. The National Assembly started cracking down on some more radical folks, which made them an enemy of the revolution. Eventually, they were replaced by the Legislative Assembly, which was made up of several factions. And, there's only one we really care about, the Jacobins, who were considered radical and sought a republic. As a government, the Legislative Assembly didn't do much, but various economic and food supply problems continued. After that, they were replaced by government number 4, the National Convention. This made France officially a republic, which was a big step, and the government was now made of entirely Jacobins, but they were split into two subgroups. The Mountain, the radical and urban Republicans led by Georges Danton and Maximilien Robespierre, and the Girondins, who were more rural and moderate. In 1793, the Robespierre-led Committee of Public Safety was created, and it was designed to take care of the biggest issues of the state. They convicted Louis XVI of treason on January 21, 1793, and executed him, which marked the beginning of the most well-known period of the Revolution, the Reign of Terror. Basically, everyone became very paranoid, and if you were deemed an enemy to the revolution and its ideals, you would be tried, and usually convicted, of treason. Even Danton himself was convicted. Eventually, the people rose up against him in the Thermidorian reaction. I like to remember the name of the Thermidorian reaction because of the dish lobster thermidor, which is a French dish, and I guarantee you during this time, the French people were not partaking in lobster thermidor, because they were broke and hungry. Now, before I can explain what our next government was, I need to tell you something. France was fighting several wars during this time. I just didn't mention them until now, and the reason why will make sense in a second. Basically, France's neighbors, most importantly Britain, Prussia, and the Holy Roman Empire, or as I like to call it, Austria at this point, were kind of getting concerned about what was going on during the time, which is perfectly understandable. If you walked outside and saw your neighbors doing this, you'd be pretty concerned too. So in 1791, Prussia and the HRE issued the Declaration of Pillnitz, which was basically a declaration that stated that both states wanted Louis XVI back on the throne, which of course Louis himself also wanted. The government at the time, the Legislative Assembly, decided to go ahead and declare war on Austria in April 1792, with Prussia joining in that June. They fought for a while, and then Britain joined in 1793 against the National Convention. Louis openly supported these efforts, which is why he was convicted and then killed. However, in an utterly shocking move, the French won. Listen, I like a good joke about the French being bad at wars. This video opened on one, but they won, y'all, for real. And this happened for two major reasons. The first was the Levée en Masse. This was a mass conscription effort in which basically every man between 18 to 25 was conscripted without bias, and war became a national mission, which helped foster a big national identity. It also helped to foster an army the size of 1 million, which was bigger than anyone on Europe had before then. The second reason, and the one we care about, is a guy named Napoleon Bonaparte. Yep, that Napoleon Bonaparte. Fun fact about Napoleon, he was around 5'6" or 5'7", which was actually not too far off from the average height at the time. It's just that people think he's short today. And it's people that think 5'7" is short today that are the reason I can't get a girlfriend. Eventually, the revolution became a bunch of coups, and he came out as the first consul of France. And in some ways, he was even more powerful than Louis was before him, and he declared that the revolution was officially over. After that, he actually did help out the state a bit. He brought back the Catholic Church after the National Assembly broke away from them. He made careers based off of merit, which also created new social mobility, and made it so that military positions and civil offices can be bought. He established freedom of religion to Catholics, Protestants, and Jewish people, who would now receive the same rights. Finally, and arguably most importantly, he revitalized the economy of the country. He created the Bank of France for the state, balanced the national budget, provided new currency, stimulated the economy by providing food at lower costs, increased employment, and lowered taxes on farmers. And then he decided to wage war, because of course he did. Big B Bonaparte saw himself as a figure that could build an extremely strong and powerful French empire and started going on conquests. He was pretty successful too, but many of the states he took started experiencing nationalist revivals that would beat back his conquest. In Spain, where Napoleon's brother Joseph had taken over, a guerrilla war called the Peninsular War took place, and where Bonaparte had taken a bunch of the German states, they also started trying to resist and protested against him. Eventually, Britain, Austria, Russia, and Prussia all came together to beat him and forced him into a loss at the Battle of Leipzig, after which they formed the Quadruple Alliance. They then had the Congress of Vienna, which forced France to give up all the land it had gained, put the Bourbons back on the throne, and redefine the national borders to be where they were before. This meant that France had come back to where it started, sort of. They had a monarchy, but at least now it was constitutional. Granted, a lot of things went back to the way they were before the Revolution, and things were not nearly as democratic and free as they had been before. But the French Revolution did do one big thing. It spread Enlightenment ideals and spawned a new wave of both conservatism, that is, trying to keep the current balance of power within Europe, and a new wave of liberalism throughout Europe. Various other states and countries began to take on more and more democratic attitudes towards government, which also combined with increasing nationalism. This led to various revolutions in the 1800s, and while not all of them worked out, they all very clearly had impacts and set stages for major historical developments in the future. And all of that because France lost a war with itself. And so, yeah, that's the French Revolution. I'm not really sure what to do for the outro, because, this isn't going on YouTube, probably, but I don't know. I mean, this is for a history project, so I don't know what I'm going to do with this. To my classmates, I hope it helped your review. To Mr. Haygood, I hope you liked it, and I would love a 100 on the assignment. But that's going to be all for right now. So I guess I'll see you guys later or in class or something. But that's all for today. Peace out.